video.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde and I'm so glad you could join me. I actually missed an episode this week and I feel like I missed something important because it has been War of the Worlds since then. And we've got a big week ahead of us next week with an election and everything. So we're going to talk today about the coming SLAPP-down. Did you notice SLAPP is with two P's? Yes, this refers to a very specific type of lawsuit that has played out in the last week. There's actually a big one that's playing out right now. But before we go there, let us take a moment to talk about the upcoming election on Tuesday. I'm sure someone has some encouragement for the voting public, that is. Ooh, that was an interesting Freudian slip considering what we're going to cover here. Idaho voters must reject far-right extremism this Tuesday. By the way, the headline writer, when they originally wrote this headline for IdahoEdNews.org, must have really been animated because it was Idaho voters must reject raw right extremism. I mean, they were pounding those keys to get that headline written. And Representative Lauren Necochea says, and this is where you have to listen very closely. This is a politician that's writing. So the truth is something that's going to be, can we just say, pliable in her hands, the rhetorical tools that she's using here. So she starts by telling us democracy is at its best when consensus candidates prevail. Okay, now first question I have, do we live in a democracy? Do we live in a direct democracy? Is that our form of government? Whether at the national level, whether at the state level, even at the local level? It's not. Which makes you wonder, Lauren, why would you use that language? Democracy is at its best when consensus candidates prevail. It sounds nice, but this is like one of Kamala Harris's word salads. You know, it's, okay, what exactly are we supposed to make of this? Well, Representative Necochea says, in this ideal world, office holders have broad support from their constituents and work to strengthen the institutions under their purview. I'd like some clarification on what she means by strengthen. Is that to grow? Is that to expand? Is that to consolidate its power? Because that sounds a lot like, I don't know, it sounds like what a cancer would do, actually. But here she gives us some examples, so maybe I'm being a bit hasty. Library board commissioners seek to make library surfaces better and more accessible. Okay, well, that's their job. But does that mean growing government, or does that mean something else? Does that mean they're supposed to make, when they make services better and more accessible, what exactly are we talking about making more accessible? Is it like, you know, books on teaching kids how to use dildos and things like that? Because there are people that are working to make that accessible too. So again, Lauren, not to question too much here, but what exactly do you mean by that? She says municipal leaders are dedicated to building vibrant cities and delivering public safety and other services reliably, which is great until we ask a couple follow-up questions like at whose expense, and is that a proper function of that municipal government? This one's great too. Obviously, she's been thinking a lot about the West Bonner County School District over the last couple of months or the last couple of years. School board trustees believe in providing quality public schools, government schools, okay? Not quality schools, but only government schools in every child's neighborhood with qualified teachers and proven administrators. In other words, other credentialed bureaucrats. They want somebody who's part of the system, somebody who smells like the machinery. Now, she goes on to say, Idaho is seeing a disturbing trend leading us away from this ideal. Oh, here we go. Extremist candidates with radical agendas are gaining power, often damaging the very institutions they are meant to safeguard. That sounds alarming, doesn't it? Radical agendas? What exactly is that radical agenda? She doesn't really say. So welcome to your emotional association getting to fill in the blanks. This is a wonderful example of the unspecified predicate, often damaging the very institutions they're meant to safeguard. Okay, just hypothetically, though, if an institution was to, I don't know, exceed the proper limits of its power and its mission, if it was experiencing some mission creep and starting to get into things it really shouldn't be doing in the first place, would you not want to limit that? Is that considered damage? To limit government? Again, cancer would use these very same excuses. You can't limit me. That damages me. Yeah, but you're cancer. And in some cases, so is government, depending on what it's doing and why it's doing it. Well, she says on November 7th, voters must be vigilant and reject extremism as we decide. We, here's the royal we, the collectivist we, who will lead our school boards and communities. She's very generous in purporting that it's ours. But this is also collectivist talk and very common among people who tend to think, in group terms and don't to believe in the rights of individuals. Now, she does talk about the West Bonner County School District as a cautionary tale, illustrating the stakes and the ease with which extremism can take hold. I still don't know exactly what it was that was so extremist about either Keith Rutledge or Susan Brown or Brandon Durst. Now, did they come in as vetted, parts of the machinery? No, they did not. They brought in a different point of view, but I never saw anything that would indicate, they were going to totally remake the whole school system. They were going to do all this. And of course, she points out here, Necochea says they had extremely narrow margins of victory in a low turnout election. Yet, would you care about that if it was your candidate that won, though? No, you'd be like, well, they won, right? Okay, so quit splitting hairs here. Overall, only a few hundred votes were cast, just a fraction of eligible voters. Now, she does make a good point here. The people who show up and vote are the ones who get to help shape the direction of things. So, it's a popularity contest, but it's one that if you're going to complain about it, you should probably be willing to participate and not just sit back and complain. This never seems to go my way. If you're not participating, there's no way it could. Necochea says it's understandable that local elections can be overlooked due to the demands of work, family, and other responsibilities. Nevertheless, she says, as we've seen in West Bonner, the consequences of sitting on the sidelines can be profound. Apparently, a lot of leftists were sitting on the sidelines in 2021. Brown and Rutledge, along with the third trustee, hired an unqualified, inexperienced ideologue. Show me the damage he did. I mean, it's so funny, this reliance on, but that has to be vetted by our system, one of us, gobbledygook, or whatever they were saying in the movie Freaks. But here we have the freaks on display. Yes, they had an inexperienced ideologue who supports school vouchers. No, he supports school choice. And that's an important clarification. It's not a matter of everything we don't like is vouchers, but again, these are Democrat talking points. It's not just Representative Lauren Necochea who does this. House Minority Leader Ilana Rubel, same thing. I was interviewing her on a radio interview this weekend. Everything I don't like is vouchers. Okay, it's a catch-all. It's a cuss word for people who do not want school choice. The embattled superintendent ignored input from the public. Okay, input from a tiny left-wing, hardcore Karen oriented part of the public. It was not everybody. Not everybody was upset, but there was a definite little gaggle of Karens that were showing up at every meeting and imposing themselves on everyone else. He made unpopular decisions. He alienated educators. Again, not everybody. Some people were actually happy to see it. People were applying. He also demanded an expensive package of perks and benefits, including free legal assistance for his spouse and car, all while calling for deep cuts to educational service investments. Okay, this is spin on her part. What he was asking, I would love to see it compared to what other superintendents around the state are doing. And just because a person asks for something in an employment contract doesn't mean they're going to get it. But you don't get what you don't ask for. So, would I ask for those same things? I don't know. But Brandon probably had his reasons for asking for it. Oh, it drove people crazy. How dare he come in here and think that he knows what's going on? Anyway, and deep cuts to educational service investments, deep cuts to tax and spend. In other words, he was saying, don't sit there and tax the taxpayers. They didn't pass a supplemental levy, I believe, and that's probably what's got her chapped. Ultimately, the dysfunction united the community, or at least the communist portion of the community, which successfully recalled the trustees. But undoing the damage was a difficult task. The damage? He was there for 3 months. What damage? Involving gathering signatures to secure a recall election, raising funds, pouring volunteer hours into running recall campaigns, and stealing the opposition's campaign signs. Oh, wait, that's not in there, but it did happen. Anyway, even after voters decisively ousted Rutledge and Brown, court orders, criminal investigations, and obstruction ensued before the superintendent finally resigned. He said he would resign. He gave his resignation and said, I'll have an orderly departure here. But there was some serious misdoing that was going on there. And who knows, maybe for the time being, it'll continue. The bigger question is there going to be a West Bonner County School District this time next year? Idaho voters, Representative Necochea tells us, can prevent disasters like this one on Tuesday. She says important races across the state, and many will take place across the state, and many could be decided by a handful of votes. Okay, it's not likely, but it could happen. Doing our research before we enter the voting booth gives us the best chance of supporting candidates. Listen to what she wants, who will faithfully strengthen public education. So candidates who will uphold the public education monopoly, meaning government schools, maintain community safety, which is a catch-all, meaning expand government, and support thriving main streets, another kind of catchphrase. We're the Main Street Caucus. We represent average people. Well, there are a lot of business interests that are, how can I say this nicely? Lying in bed with the legislature. If that's what they mean by a thriving Main Street, may have to pass on this. Nonetheless, your vote in local elections is critical to protect what your community has built and make necessary progress. Really, what kind of progress? I mean, are we moving toward or away from something? What exactly is that? On November 7th, she says, let's elect Idahoans who prioritize the public good and the betterment of the state we call home. The public good. That's the call to collectivism right there. Because if it's the public good, well, then how could anything that they do possibly be disagreed with? And yet there's a lot of things government's doing that it really shouldn't. All right, let's talk about a big slapdown. One of them happened actually just overnight. Yesterday was not a good day in court for this guy. I'd like you to meet Greg Graff. Greg is a political activist. He's not someone who tolerates a lot of dissent, but he had filed a lawsuit against, I believe it was Greg Pruitt and also Dustin Hurst, and there was one other individual, I believe it was Representative Christensen from eastern Idaho. And for the last 2 years, Graff has been threatening to sue them, defamation, all kinds of stuff. Basically, he didn't like their tweets, and so he was going after him lock, stock, and barrel. Well, the judge ruled, Greg, sorry, you are a public figure, or at least a part public figure. So in other words, if you're going to dish it, you're going to have to take it too. But this lawsuit was, looking for something like $200,000 in damages. And so this was hanging over people forced to be dragged into court and protect themselves. It's a frivolous kind of lawsuit, and it's strategic litigation against public participation. That's why they call it SLAPP, S-L-A-P-P. And this is what Greg was doing. And unfortunately, he got slapped down. I'm sorry, that's rubbing salt in somebody's wounds. But these kinds of lawsuits and this kind of legal action is more common than you think. And actually, Idaho has very little protection. I'm looking at a report here. This is actually from the Institute for Free Speech. They score us with an F. Now, that's not because they're picking on Idaho. I want you to see the criteria by which they say when it comes to these strategic litigation against public participation lawsuits, Idaho has no protection as far as covered speech, as far as anti-SLAPP procedure. They've got 0 out of 100 points. And there's a couple other criteria that come into play here as well. Suspension of court proceedings upon an anti-SLAPP motion. In other words, if you can show or you can move, hey, this is just a frivolous lawsuit meant to tie me up, and to prevent me from participating in exercising my First Amendment rights. So that accounts for part of the score. Burden of proof on the plaintiff in order to defeat an anti-SLAPP motion, right to an immediate appeal, award of costs and attorney's fees, expansive statutory interpretation, instruction to courts. These are things that are needed. Why is that? Well, because Graff is not the only one who's been doing this. So they have created a report about each state. This is, again, the Institute for Free Speech, rating states state by state in their legal protections against SLAPP suits, strategic litigation against public participation. This is a better explanation. Unscrupulous plaintiffs abuse the legal system by using SLAPPs to prevent speakers from exercising their First Amendment rights, suppressing, punishing, or chilling speech that the plaintiff doesn't like. Oh, I know. Don't get ahead of me now. I know some of you are making the connection here. Such a litigant typically claims that the speech constitutes defamation, suing speakers to harass, silence, or force them to bear significant litigation costs. Where have we seen that before? Just within recent memory, it seems like that's been a thing. Oh, here the Idaho Sons of Liberty chapter reminds us Idaho's most infamous SLAPP lawsuit is currently underway. It's actually happening right now, and it needs to stop immediately. Our elected representatives, including sheriffs, need to start protecting the defendant in that case, or they may end up with blood on their hands. We don't need another Ruby Ridge. Yes. This is the SLAPP lawsuit that has been going on now for the better part of a year and a half, almost 2 years, and it just keeps getting worse as it goes. Ammon Bundy, Baby Cyrus, this is Baby Cyrus's mother, Marissa. So Idaho could use some protection against this kind of predatory behavior. Yeah, predatory behavior even being brought about by, let's just say, a great big corporation that does a lot of business in Idaho and has the funds to wage legal warfare, to their heart's content. Look at this. Senator Brian Lenny steps up and says, hey, Idaho needs an anti-SLAPP statute ASAP. Luckily, he says, I know a guy who has one on deck ready to go. It's him. And it's time to protect Idahoans against frivolous distraction lawsuits coming to a state house near you in 2024. That's going to be an interesting one to watch. I'll be keeping a close eye, if only because probably this is where we're going to see groups like IACI as well as other, establishment politicians lining up. So you can't do that. Why? Because we have friends in those organizations and those corporations that are using these kinds of SLAPP lawsuits. All right, one final thing before we call it an episode, I got to give a shout out here to Brandon Durst. I mean, okay, Necochea may be hating on him, but I thought he had a very good answer to this. This was a poll from the Public Religion Research Institute teaching about slavery. Now, there's not widespread support here. They were looking at, you've got Republicans in red, independents in gray, Democrats in blue. Books that include depictions of slavery should be banned from being taught in public schools. Those are pretty low numbers. 7% of Republicans, roughly 7% of independents, 9% of Democrats say, yeah, we should ban those books. Very minor support, but there it is. Also, public high school courses like AP African American History should be banned because the topics of slavery and segregation are likely to make white students feel guilty or uncomfortable. Now, believe it or not, Republicans actually got behind that one pretty good. And independents, not so much. Democrats, hardly at all. But the idea of teaching about slavery, well, why shouldn't we teach kids about slavery? You should teach kids about slavery. But you should be teaching them about slavery, not in the sense of, it existed once upon a time. That was a problem that was solved by people in the mid to late 1800s to the tune of about 600,000 American dead. So we can pretend that wasn't really solved. If we're going to teach kids about slavery, I think one of the things we need to be teaching them is be very careful of those who would enslave you in ways other than chattel slavery. Now, here's Brandon's response, and this is why I got to give him an attaboy for this one. Brandon Hurst weighed in on it and said, look, I don't know of anyone who's arguing we shouldn't teach about slavery. Of course we should. But he says what we shouldn't do is tell white kids that they are somehow personally responsible for the current conditions of minorities, because they aren't. Amen. They're not. And that's the problem. Well, you just don't want to hurt their feelings. Well, if you're teaching them that you are responsible for the condition of minorities today, what exactly are you trying to do? You're trying to weaponize guilt. Anytime someone comes to you with weaponized guilt, they're either wanting you to obey them or they're wanting you to break out your checkbook. In either case, they're being opportunistic and they're not being entirely honest. Again, slavery was a real thing, but it was a real thing that was solved by other people in another time. And the danger of slavery has not gone away. It's just instead of an individual owner owning you, you've got your government, you've got the state, you've got politicians thinking that they own you. So when someone suggests that, well, we don't want people teaching about slavery, no, we need to be teaching about slavery, but we need to be teaching about the danger of slavery at the hands of our current administrations. Democrat, Republican, I don't care. If they are expanding government and they're expanding their control over your life and their control over your pocketbook, I'm sorry, but now you're arguing degrees of slavery. Well, I'm 2/7 free because I have Saturday and Sunday off. Well, whoop-de-doo. But if you don't get to call the shots for yourself, and I'm talking your own peaceful decisions, then you are, to a degree, enslaved. Fun question, by the way, if you want to talk to a candidate between now and the election. Ask them, is there a tax rate that's so high, so outrageous, that I would be under no moral obligation whatsoever to pay it? Watch their eyes spin in their sockets. Watch them look around the room, there's somebody over there I need to talk to right now. Questions like that scare them. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our